So this is a work in progress. We don't know how this is going to turn out, so we're anxious to find out. So what do we know about the future? The future is constantly unfolding. The future is relentless. The future is going to happen whether you want it to or not. It's very unforgiving. And it's one of nature's greatest forces. Now, most people think about time pushing us into the future. I think about the future pulling us into the future. So the future is going to happen whether or not we agree to participate. You can decide, I don't want to go into the future, but it doesn't really work. You're going to go whether or not you want to. So if your next project is not aligned with the problems, needs, and desires of the future is going to kill it. And so how do we align stuff with the future? The question to be asking is, what does the future want? We're going to come back to this question here in a little bit. So some of you have heard my story. I talk about this idea of the crystal ball, because people ask, do I have a crystal ball? And yes, I do have a crystal ball. It happens to be sitting right over there on the shelf. And Deb told me one day, why don't you take that crystal ball to the office, because it's just collecting dust here at home. So I did. I put it in the car and I took it to the office, and I was about 5 minutes down the road, and I looked over and my crystal ball had started to fire on the seat next to me. Giant lens, sun shining in. This is Boy Scouts 101. So I managed to put it out. It never caused any real damage or anything. But I imagined in my head the headlines the next day in the newspaper, Futurist killed by his own crystal ball. And he didn't see it coming. So I like to start with that disclaimer that the way I vision the future is flawed. So we will take that with a grain of salt. So what does the future want? Let's reframe that question around, how does the future get created? The future gets created in the minds of everybody around us. Everybody that's here today, everybody that's in our neighborhoods, everybody around us is creating the future. Sometimes the computer doesn't cooperate. If you follow Richard Florida wrote the book, The Rise of the Creative Class. And he talks about different groups of people, the super creative core, and the creative professionals. It's roughly 30% of the workforce that has a higher level of influence on how the future gets created than most, but everybody's participating in it. So people are making decisions today based on their vision of what the future holds. Now this is real important, because we talk about the future creates the present. Now this is just the opposite of what most people think. Most people think that what we're doing today is going to create the future, but from a little different perspective, it's the images that we hold in our head of what the future holds determine our actions today. So the future creates the present. So our visions of the future determine our actions today. This is very important. So if we change people's visions of the future, we change the way they make decisions today. Now this is key. So we have two choices. We can either work within the parameters of their existing vision, or we can change it. My preference is to change their vision. So how do we go about changing people's vision of the future? I'm going to actually come back to that question as well. The first thing we'll talk about is the familiarity contraction principle. And this is a key piece of the theories behind this. The first time you travel across a new city, a new route that you've never traveled before, it takes a long time to get there. The perception is that it takes a long time. The reason is because you have all these visual cues and you're paying close attention to everything that's going on. Every subsequent trip, every time you go down that same path, it seems to take less and less time. So over time, the perception is that it takes less time. So it contracts. This ties in with how we think about the future. The more we know about the future, the more we think about it, the easier it is for us to work with. The easier it is for us to make connections in this world that we're not presently familiar with. So it becomes easier for us to interact with. It's all about our relationship with the future. So most people believe that the future is totally unpredictable. There's actually a lot of aspects of the future that are very predictable. As an example, we can predict a lot of things with a high degree of probability. The building that we're standing in today, I can predict that this is still going to be here 6 months from now. I can predict that with a high degree of probability. That the Earth is going to travel around the sun in roughly the same orbit 100 years from now. I can predict that with a high degree of probability. The laws of gravity are still going to be in effect. That people will still need to communicate. That we're still going to have the seasons, summer, spring, winter, and fall. If we plant seeds in the ground, a certain percentage are going to grow. If we plan a birthday party even, we have enough control over our future so that we can plan that birthday party with a high degree of probability that it's going to actually take place. Most of our future is being formed around this stable, slow-moving elements that are highly predictable. But there's areas of great uncertainty. The areas of greatest uncertainty are the natural systems, weather, animals, earthquakes, floods, and then human systems. Anything to do with government, technology. So it's our ability to manage and direct both natural systems and human systems gives us the keys to controlling the future. So when we come back to this question, how do we change people's visions of the future? We're going to work through this process here of communicating with the future. I'll go through this real quick. There's 4 steps to this process. One is to build the vision, turn it into an attractor, unleash the vision, and listen to the results. And it's through this process called anticipatory analytics. So when we build the vision, there's multiple steps that we can go through in building this vision. We can tell stories about the future. We can do storyboards. We do graphic art, animation, models, surveys, interviews. All these things create a body of work about the future. And once we build that vision of the future, it becomes easier for us to interact with it. It becomes easier for us to visualize it. And also videos. So I'll use this example here. There's a group called the Seasteading group that Peter Thiel has been funding. Peter Thiel was one of the founders of PayPal and one of the early investors in Facebook. So he likes the idea of floating countries, of the idea of building countries that are standalone little things in the ocean. And so he ran a competition. They ran a competition, seasteading competition, and it was all pretty disconnected before they ran the competition. But the image that came out that won the competition was this one here. And so when they came up with this vision of the future, that changed people's perception of how doable it is. And this image of the future, it came at it from a lot of different angles, and so you can kind of start rolling it around in your head as to what life would be like in this seasteading community. Some of the other ones that didn't win, this one here took second place, and then this one was in third place, and then this is the fourth place winner. But all of these contributed to the body of work surrounding seasteading. With these images, suddenly it seemed more doable. Now this led other groups to get into the whole floating city, floating country idea. And this is one called the Lily Pad. And the Lily Pad is, there's a group out there trying to get this funded. And they've done some fascinating pieces of artwork to show what that's going to look like. This is the Lily Pad next to Monte Carlo. And this is Monte Carlo at night. Looks like fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster.
So you can see what these images are doing to you right now in your head. You suddenly think, this is doable. This would be cool. If we can create the same type of images surrounding micro farming, suddenly they become very doable. So the second part is to turn it into an attractor. The idea of an attractor is something, some event in the future that we're somehow magnetically drawn towards. Things like cures for cancer, flying cars, things like that, are things that we know they're going to happen sometime in the future, and there's a lot of effort going towards making them happen. But it's like a force of nature that's drawing us to those endpoints. If you think about what Leonardo da Vinci did, he dedicated over 35,000 words and 500 drawings to the concept of flying. Nobody at Da Vinci's time really thought people could fly. Because he did all these drawings, he made it seem reasonable. He made it seem possible. So when we're creating an attractor, the first thing is to conceptualize the idea and then to add dimension and realism to it. So this builds momentum on a subconscious level for the masses with vision. So this is a lot like Madison Avenue has done for years. The advertising people, when they take a concept of some existing product and they try to make it so it seems like it can enter your life easy and something that you need. So realism creates viability in the minds of the visionaries and the innovators. So you start with the vision, you add dimension and realism to it, you build elements of purpose. If it seems like it's needed, if it has some purpose, then and then it creates relevance in the world that we live in. And then rinse and repeat. You go through this process multiple times to get it right. And it's a self-correcting process. The third part is then to unleash the vision. You begin the global conversation and you start influencing the influencers. So once the concept's in place, then you can use prizes and incentives to build additional awareness for it. The fourth part is anticipatory analytics. You're listening to the results. So this idea of communicating with the future is just very simple. It's signal sent, signal received. So when we're building these visions of the future, we're building this body of work about the future, we're tagging these visions of the future, these stories, with keyword phrases that aren't currently being used. And then we monitor it. So that's the signal sent, and then we check and see what's going on in the online world, and we can tap into the global conversation. We can figure out how many people are using these keyword phrases. So once the number of keyword phrases reaches critical mass in the global conversation, we can determine then when the vision will become self-perpetuating, when it will take off on a life of its own. We can also tell when certain products become viable in the marketplace. So as an example, we have lots of ideas for flying cars. Actually, the first flying car was built in 1917. And we still don't have any that are affordable and that we can all just jump into and fly around. My thinking is that before we get into flying cars, we're going to need flying delivery drones. Flying delivery drones that can fly and dock with your house and deliver packages, pizza, deliver water to your house or take out the trash. So this flying delivery drone era is one that's not getting any discussion. This is an interim step before we get to flying cars. So I wrote an article about it and I published it online. And now if you go and look under that phrase, flying delivery drones, there's 1,550 results on Google just because of writing that article. It created the global conversation. Now, if we would have done a lot of artwork and drawings and videos on it, that number would be exponentially higher. So once there's a sufficient body of work and sufficient global conversation, the vision becomes self-perpetuating. And the vision will morph into exactly what the future wants. So why bother predicting the future when we can control it? So how much control do we really have over the future? Well, we can create the spark, we can drive the vision, we can cause the world to take notice, We can implant new visions into the minds of the decision makers, and we can track the progress and act on the results. So tonight is not about how to keep squirrels out of our garden. Tonight is not about the right worms to use in our compost pile. It's not about a forum on healthy lifestyles. It's not about political commentary on healthcare. It's not about discussions of diet, nutrition, or food. It's not about the evils of Monsanto. See, squirrels are pesky things. So it's important to know what this is not about. So tonight's event is about creating visions of the future for micro-farming, telling stories about them, visions that are 10 to 20 years out, and systems for planning, growing, and harvesting in the future. So we're going to go through 5 quick visions here of the future, and then we'll come back, and then we're going to break up into groups here and discuss this in greater detail. So with that, I'm going to invite Brian to come up here.
Hi, I'm Brian Baker, and I was asked to speak on this backyard farming business, which has got to be the most unsexy topic that I can think of quickly, I guess. But let me tell you a quick story. It's great to see everybody here. I'm really impressed with all the interest. I moved to Boulder about 5 years ago, and I moved into I'm not a homeowner, I moved into an apartment on Mapleton Street in downtown Boulder. There are 6 buildings on that block, a bunch of condos though, like mine, and apartments, and a couple single-family homes. There are about 50 people on that block, along with a couple churches. And my landlord was not maintaining the front yard at all. And so I said, well, why can't I just start a little vegetable garden or something? And he said, sure, give it a shot. My neighbors and I got some junk wood, and we made some vegetable beds, and we were out there all the time, you know, sowing the soil and tending to our little garden, and people started making fun of me. They called me Farmer B, and Farmer B became a name that was kind of silly, and they'd make fun of me because my knees were always dirty, or I was building something out of more junk wood, and so forth. And then I came across the idea, I've got so much food here that I don't know what to do with, that I started handing out heads of romaine. And my heads of romaine lettuce got better than what you could buy at Whole Foods. They started using Farmer B as a term of endearment. And right now, of the 6 homes on the block, 4 of them have vegetable gardens. One guy just put in vegetable beds that cost him $3 grand on his front yard, and he plans on making all his money back this year. He's got a family of 7. I guess this, when I have to go to this thing, my printer broke, which always happens, you know. But backyard farming is growing like crazy. It isn't just happening on my block in the last 3 years. It's happening all over the country. It's at about a 20% increase year over year since 2007, which is really something to think about when, you know, Scott, the big company that makes turf builder and all the grass seed and stuff, is a $40 billion concern in revenues every year. They're starting to look at what can we do on the natural side? What can we do on the seed side? I do buy some of my seeds from Monsanto, but I prefer to buy corn from the farmer's market, hold those seeds in my freezer, and then plant them the next year. And that's how this community growth and this idea about farming as community and growing your own food has really started to take on. I don't think the recession hurt either. Tom asked me earlier in the evening, is it really possible to invest some money and get it all back? The answer is a resounding yes. The first year, I put in about $50, and that was in seed and gasoline, running McGuckins and whatever else. And I realized about $350 in savings. Right now, we have 14 or 16 vegetable beds, and they are producing, let's see, for 5 people, about $600 per person of food. And we each put in $50. That's it. So it is very economically sound to have your own backyard farm. What is the future of farming, backyard farming? The future's kind of an interesting thing. I was looking at this over the weekend, and it's kind of a mix of old technologies and new technologies. So my neighbor who just spent $3,000 building vegetable beds, he's got, you know, the fanciest water system, and he's using biochar in his soil, and he's got all this, you know, he's got the USDA out there seeing if he can get certified organic so he can sell to Ideal and all that kind of stuff. She doesn't like that.
Well, I don't like the government coming in my bed, anybody's bed.
Fair enough. But there, some of these old technologies that we have to relearn, just like how do we rotate our crops? How do we water? What kind of soil amendments do we use? I use strict steer manure. That's it. But, you know, other people use other things. Pest control, drip watering systems, box gardens, all that kind of stuff. All these technologies that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, we need to kind of relearn. And I've helped my neighborhood relearn them. There are several community organizations that are helping all of Boulder, Longmont, Lyons. There are different areas that Grant Family Farms has tutorials all the time about how to farm your own food. But those are mostly older technologies. So I'd like to talk tonight about some of those older technologies and how we're implementing those, and then some of the new technologies and what the future holds in strict new technology. And there I'm talking about grow lights. There's a plant over there that's under a grow light. Upside down, vertical farms, indoor farms, aquaponics, which is fish plus vegetables. The fish effluent feeds the vegetable garden. Those are just now, kits are available, but they're selling like crazy, so it won't be long before we see commercial, in your living room, commercial applications of fish plus plants. Hydroponics, now of course this is being led by our burgeoning marijuana industry, but they have made great advances just in the last couple of years in hydroponics, and I'd like to discuss that as well. And aeroponics. I can think of 2 companies in Boulder that have just sprung up in the last couple of years that are just about keeping no soil, just misting, or keeping your plants in open air with grow lights. Biochar is another one. There's several programs that are government funded that are encouraging the use of biochar. So you burn your junk wood in the dumpster behind your house or your wherever, and then you actually plant that wood with your soil, and your growth will increase by 30%. Who knew? But that's a brand new technology now being introduced. Anyway, we're going to separate into tables, I believe, and each of us is going to have a section that we're going to talk about. Those are the new technologies in the future of backyard farming that'll be at my table. Thank you.
So let's try that again. Well, I can skip that one now. So what's my background in this? In a word, none. I don't have a green thumb, but I eat and I age, and so I'm a little concerned about what I'm taking in and its quality and what kind of impact it's having on my health and my longevity. I'm planting a backyard garden for the very first time ever. This is actually extraordinary if you know me, so I'm getting a little help. So, of course, the first question I always had is where do we get our food from? And of course, my answer was always been the grocery store. So, but the problem is, this is kind of it's common ignorance, I think, for me. I mean, I'm a suburban guy. I just don't know. I don't really follow where it comes from. But there's a huge system of production and distribution that's all invisible to a lot of us. So nowadays, so there's a trend for big farms to get bigger. There's also a counter trend that we're trying to encourage here tonight, but this is one trend that is still common right now. The question is, why do big farms get bigger nowadays? Some people point to economies of scale or economies or efficiencies of specialization. When economists study this, they tend to find that there's not a whole lot of evidence that bigger farms actually are more productive overall. They point to other drivers for it, loss of labor resources to urbanization, and a few other things around that. Fewer farmers now mean more land available to cultivate. And government subsidies right now also encourage larger operations, mainly to stabilize markets and to increase national security around our food supply. So as a result, corn output per acre has increased over 4 times in the past century. Personal food budgets are half of what they used to be in 1970 and in the developed world, and probably were even before then. So what happens when you multiply the output using constant raw materials? So according to Michael Pollan, if you're standing in a field in Iowa, there's an immense amount of food being grown. None of it is edible. The commodity corn must be processed before we can eat it. And the irony is that the Iowa farmer can no longer feed himself. So as a result, we've got livestock fed on commodity corn. We've got greater fat content. Sugar consumption is up, even if table sugar consumption is down since 1970 because of high fructose corn syrup. Of course, that leads to a lot of known problems with more obesity, more diabetes, and related health problems. So as a result, according to Kurt Ellis and King Corn, for the first time in American history, our generation was at risk of having a shorter lifespan than our parents, and it was because of what we ate. I don't know whether that's true, but it certainly is a little frightening to think about anyway. So what are the real consequences of big agriculture? Greater quantity of and access to food, but lower quality, potentially greater health risks overall, and some claim there's a disproportionate impact on lower socioeconomic groups because cheaper food. So what are the alternatives? That's what we're trying to explore tonight. We want to find out if we can encourage opposite trends. There is a counter trend in small-scale agriculture, personal, neighborhood, and city gardens, state programs, things of that nature, including programs to help lower-income communities grow their own food. Another question is about organic production. Actually, it's more expensive at the point of sale, but the cost of conventional products doesn't factor in taxpayer subsidies. The truth is, we really don't know which is more expensive, conventional production or organic production. So the question also is, what else should be on this list? And hopefully we're going to find that out tonight when we sit down and talk about it. So I have some open questions about the feasibility of small-scale agriculture. It sounds like we're starting to get some answers from people who know a lot more about it than I do. So can it replace big ag? Who can afford it? Is it just for the well-off, or can everybody afford it? And we're starting to get answers about that too. But can it fulfill the requirements like national security of our food supply? How might future microagriculture differ from historical practices, and how might it be the same? I don't know all these answers. That's what we're trying to find out. And of course, what are our goals? What do we want to see happen, and why? So hopefully we'll be able to start to pull together some of those answers tonight. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Sampson. I'm going to push the edge of agriculture tonight by starting out talking about aliens. The reason I'm going to talk about aliens is because probably within the last 2 weeks, I learned of information the military has released under the Shared Information Act that has to do with the defense of the world in case aliens attack. You may not think that deals with agriculture, but I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle as the military did. The military said, okay, if aliens are going to attack the world, why? What do they want? Well, they don't want diamonds or gold, rare earth metals or other materials. They can get that anywhere they want in the universe. It's easier to get it out of asteroids. And they don't want water. Last year, for example, when a probe was shot into the moon, the dust that scattered up and the spectrographic images showed that there's 30% more water on the moon than there is in the Sahara. So it's easier to get water elsewhere. In fact, it's one of the most common elements in the entire universe. What would they want? Well, 2 of the most uncommon things in the universe are protein and chlorophyll. The basis of agriculture, the basis of growing plants, of living creatures. So coming at that from a slightly different perspective, that may be the most valuable stuff in the entire universe. In 1991, one of the first timetables of the future was created in England. That's updated approximately every 2 or 3 years. And the most recent one has been updated. It's a timetable that takes the predictions and puts them against how long is it going to take for this to become a reality. Marvin Citron put the last one together, I think, about 2009. That means we're due for another one soon, and maybe we can contribute to it. So what I decided to do was pull some of those predictions out of that timeline for us to use or leverage in our roundtable discussion tonight as we go forward. I've got 3 things that are going to happen in the next 5 years that I'm going to read off to you here. And some of them are a little stretch of the imagination, but that's what makes it fun. First of all, some human implants, this is within the next 5 years, so there's going to be 3 that I'm going to call off within the next 5 years, and 3 for the next 10 years. Some human implants start to be seen as status symbols. We're not talking about my hair. Okay? Insect-like robots will be used for crop pollination. I suppose that has to do with the diminishing population of bees, and we could get into talking about that. This one's a particularly interesting one, and you do have to stretch a little bit for it. The Abiocore artificial heart will be used to replace failed hearts. That's going to happen in the next 5 years. I'm going to jump just a little bit and say in the next 10 years, they're going to have kidneys, mechanical livers, and optical eyes within 10 years that are completely replaceable and non-biological. Let's go to the 3 items in the next 10 years. Machine knowledge will exceed human knowledge, and the desktop computer will be as fast or faster than your brain. The first bionic Olympics will be held in 2000. What could that do to agriculture? Think about it for 2020. Thank you. I'm a little slow. If only 2 of those things that I brought up this afternoon come true, how will they impact the future of living things, agricultural, plants, and animals? Those are the kinds of things we're going to probe in our group this afternoon, and we're going to push to 2020, maybe even 2021 if we get risky. So that's what our roundtable is going to cover. Thank you.
So one of the fun things about an event like this is to get participation by everybody. And so that's what we really want to do in these roundtables. Another aspect to this, which is very important, is to get different perspectives. So my background is more in the world of consulting, technology, and analytical kind of thinking. So what I wanted to point out is a couple of things. One is that typically you can already find the future somewhere much earlier before it spreads everywhere else. So some of you may know that the internet didn't start 10 years ago, and Al Gore didn't invent the internet. It actually started as a very small idea under the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and it just grew from there. The point being that if we look around the world, there are probably examples of what microfarming will be like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now that already exist. And one of the things that I want to do in the groups that I meet with is to try to come up with some of those places, some of those ideas that may actually spread much more broadly. And I'll give you a couple of examples here that I'm aware of in a minute as well. There's a second analytic tool that works out very well, And it's epitomized by something known as Moore's Law, which is that it is possible to actually take certain trend lines and see how they evolve and then identify what the impact of those things will be. So Moore's Law particularly applied to the number of semiconductors on a chip, but it can be applied to lots of other things, and I'll give you an example of that as well. So one of the other things that is useful to do and to look at is some examples of trends that if we extrapolate them forward will end up having a big impact. So let's go and I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that I did in terms of preparing for this discussion. As we know, the population in the U.S. is somewhere less than about 5% of the world's population. So you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of innovation in other places. And sure enough, when I looked at some of the basic key terms and some of the basic things going on in terms of microfarming, community gardens exist in almost the entire rich world. And a quick search found that there's about 18 different African countries that had various different things going on as well, and that was just in the last year or so. And if you look at Europe, there's lots and lots of different innovations going on, typically tied to the kinds of national cultures that exist in different places. As you'd imagine, the French experiment with different kinds of food and different things that we might not want to eat. They will eat them first. The Italians are doing a lot of innovation in terms of sausage making, and interestingly enough, 10% of Greater London is farmland. So I found that to be, and 60% of Greater London is actually green. It is not buildings. So when you think about some of those things, it's kind of interesting. So then I thought, okay, in terms of what actually happens, where does all this microfarming come in? What are some of the drivers of this microfarming? And I came up with 3 main drivers. And I'll talk about them with some examples. Hunger avoidance, transport avoidance, and law avoidance. So let's start with hunger avoidance. Any of you have any idea what country is probably furthest ahead in terms of the total amount of food that is actually produced organically and in an urban setting? Anyone want to venture a guess? Yeah?
China.
China, okay. Why do you say China?
Well, I think they use a lot of natural fertilizers.
Okay, it's actually closer to home than that. Anyone else want to venture a guess?
By volume or percent?
By percent of what people consume. Mexico? It's a good guess because I said it needed to be close, but it's not the right one. Brazil? Who said that? Who said Cuba? Okay, why'd you say Cuba?
Because they don't have a lot of petroleum and a lot of stuff to put on their crops. And they have the, I don't know, I just read about Cuba. So.
Yeah. From what I can tell, Cuba is probably the most advanced in terms of the percentage of produce that is actually produced in microfarms. Has a lot to do with the economic system, and it has a tremendous amount to do with, as you mentioned, the lack of resources to do anything else. So here, I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts, and this is from a particular website. Any of you that are interested, I'll be happy to give you the citation. Cuba's accomplishments are undeniably astounding, inspiring, and a testament to the country's flexibility and pragmatism. 350,000 new well-paying jobs out of a total workforce of 5 million created in urban agriculture nationally. 4 million tons of fruits and vegetables produced annually in Havana, up tenfold in a decade, and a city of 2.2 million people regionally self-sufficient in produce. These accomplishments have been supported by an extensive network of input suppliers, technical assistance providers, researchers, teachers, and government agencies. And then going back to the point of how did they get there, Cuba's shift to urban and organic agriculture was driven by necessity. As the Soviet bloc fell in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Cuba lost the primary market for its products and its source of subsidized agricultural inputs and petroleum. The crisis that ensued was referred to by the Orwellian term, the special period. And they were hungry and dark times for Cuba. To its credit, the Cuban government found partial solutions to this emergency by pushing the country towards organic and urban agriculture. As one highly placed Cuban official said about the decision to support urban farming and farmers' markets, we moved food production in the markets as close to the people as possible because there was no oil for transportation to get the people out to the food. This policy decision came at an ideological cost. It entailed a partial opening of urban food production to the free market, which resulted in increased social inequality through income distortions. It was also a 180-degree turn from the capital and input-intensive Soviet-influenced production methods valued in Cuba at the time. So I think that's an interesting vignette, and one of these other little seeds that's worth then understanding what's going on there, what things can apply in other places. Now I want to give you another example, in this case, transport avoidance. Anyone have any idea where transport costs to and from are the most expensive in the world?
Farmer's market.
Farmer's market? Okay, you're too close. Go further.
United States. China.
China? You're still too close.
Australia.
Okay, you're still too close. Space shuttle, you're getting warmer. Actually, you're a little too far. It happens to be at the South Pole. Okay? This is out of the Washington Post in January. What's round, red, and grows at the South Pole? A tomato. It's true. At the very bottom of the world, scientists working at the United States South Pole Station manage a greenhouse that grows fresh vegetables. It also provides a warm, bright place to relax during the long, dark winters, and it tests new technology that may one day help humans garden on the moon. The station lies on top of the massive Antarctic ice sheet, which is up to 2 miles thick and thousands of miles wide. Outdoor temperatures at the South Pole can drop to minus 100 degrees, and the sun does not shine for 6 months out of the year. Not ideal conditions for growing vegetables. But inside the greenhouse, known as the South Pole Food Growth Chamber, cantaloupe, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, herbs, leafy green vegetables, such as kale and lettuce, sunflowers, other edible flowers, and even watermelons flourish. About 13 pounds of food material, of plant material, roots and stems, as well as fruit, are produced each day. The plants rely on artificial light and are grown in a hydroponic solution of water and nutrients rather than soil. The approximately 37 gallons of water used per day come from melting ice from the ice sheet. There's a lot going on inside the chamber, said Lane Patterson of the University of Arizona, who manages the greenhouse. Incidentally, the entire greenhouse is managed from Tucson, Arizona. Okay? The vegetables grown there are the only fresh food available to the 50 scientists and staff members who live inside the station from mid-January to mid-October during the United States Antarctic Program's winter season. During this time, there are no flights into or out of the station because of severe conditions, so the crew's meals are prepared using frozen food flown in earlier in the year, and a fresh salad from the greenhouses is served every few days. So I'll skip a lot of the details, but then basically what they find may one day be applied to feeding astronauts. Using the South Pole greenhouse as a model, the center has also created a lunar greenhouse to test how to support life on the moon or Mars. For now, the people of the South Pole will gladly enjoy their tomatoes right here on Earth. So I think it's a very interesting example of what can be done and where you can find some of these predecessors. Now let's get on to the concept of Moore's Law. And here I turn to the field of law avoidance. For years and years, until medical marijuana became legal in this country, the primary places where production technology for growing cannabis was shared was in Amsterdam. I'm originally from the Netherlands, so I'm a little bit familiar with what happened there. And when I researched, I found a classic kind of a Moore's Law diagram for cannabis growing. And that is it is basically the potency of marijuana, which looks like it doubles about every 16 years. So, and there's a very long-term trend in that direction. Obviously, forced by various other variables that say that, this is beneficial. And I think if you look at how much can be grown per watt and how much can be grown per square foot, those rates are even faster. So sometimes a legal situation can create a huge rate of advancement in terms of various kinds of agriculture production. So I think that's also a very interesting aspect to share. Now, several people mentioned China, and I think it is worth ending with just a little bit of a vignette of China. So we talk about micro-farming here. In Beijing, they talk about balcony farmers. And there is a lot of political encouragement for that as well. Anybody who wants to start a farm on their balcony is given a tray that's about 6 square meters with all of the growing things that they need, including the soil, the seeds, and everything else by the local government. And the real objectives, and I think this actually fits just as well in China as it does here, is that what they're really encouraging people to do is to grow their own greens, to reduce carbon emissions, to clean the air, and to reduce stress. So on that note, what we'll be talking about in my group is other examples, other situations that are these little seed crystals of what may happen to farming in the future.
What a crazy topic. I'm actually born and raised on a farm up in South Dakota. Our family still owns a farm, and my brother runs the farm, and my nephew's going to take it over. There's some real interesting trends happening in agriculture right now, and I put them into these categories of precision, relevancy, and control. So with the topic of precision, we've moved from a bushel of corn to 80,000 kernels of corn. And so every single corn matters because it can, with all of the equipment that we have right now. Each kernel of corn now can produce up to 4 ears of corn on a stalk, and that's 800 seed kernels per ear of corn. And so it's quite a interesting volume of corn that can be generated from one single kernel. When we look at our technology right now, this concept of smart dust, we're making these microtransmitters with sensors, like getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the future, I mean, if you think of dust that's actually getting plowed into the ground, we can be getting information from fields. We have fields that are actually glowing with information. And so if we do that in the agricultural world, this is like an existing moisture sensor right now. These will be getting much, much smaller in the future. But knowing what's happening in any square inch of any piece of ground gives us a tremendous amount of information as to what's going on. And so this segmentation of fields and knowing how much fertilizer to put on and where the bugs are and where diseases are and everything like that, it's going to become much more obvious in the future. And so when we think about smart appliances in the future, being able to communicate with this whole supply chain that we're developing, that's going to get real interesting over the coming years. So can better food make better people? I think the answer to that is yes. So we need to start growing better food. So this human to food interface becomes real interesting. We're going from a distinct set of crop options to virtually unlimited number of crop options in the future. And these product variations are going to be driven by consumer demand. And that it all ties into this whole concept of relevancy. In the future, we're actually going to be able to jack into plants and to help determine how they grow in the future. I like to use the example of, wouldn't it be cool if you could create a tree that would, all the branches would grow into perfectly shaped rocking chairs. And so then come harvest time, you go out there and cut down all the rocking chairs. Is that so far-fetched? We're moving into this era of printed food. So if we have different food stocks that we can feed into these printing mechanisms, what the food looks like in the end can be virtually anything. So these are food printers that they're developing at Cornell University. So these are some different cookies and hors d'oeuvres that they're printing. And so, I mean, how cool is that? You just be able to print your food in the morning. Some of you won't like that, but it's one of those strange options. You get used to it. So when we think about the supply chain that develops out of this and how this demand-driven supply chain, as we create this hyper-individualized consumer base that's driving what's being produced. And so customers in the future will be able to order a 13.2% fat cheeseburger with 2.7 grams of potassium and 3.6 grams of calcium, coupled with a hint of almond and banana flavoring on a sesame seed bun with exactly 47 sesame seeds on it. I gave a talk to Frito-Lay a couple of years ago, and I talked about this concept of hyper-individuality and developed this concept for the ultimate snack machine of the future. So this is what I came up with for them, is the idea that you have hoppers on the top that have chips and pretzels and crackers and nuts on it, and they can then be blended in with different flavorings, and then all of that can come out and be bagged in just the right size portion that you want, and print your name on the bag and seals it and hands it to you. So that's the idea of the ultimate snack machine of the future. The third topic is that of control. Right now, there's way too many variables in farming. Every farmer out there is worried about the next infestation. Suddenly the weather goes bad on them and kills all the crop, hail, whatever. But there's going to be a lot of interesting ways of controlling things in the future. And so I talk about this concept of underground farming, and it started with this idea I had about taking just a hole in the ground, say 12-foot diameter, drilling it down 100 feet straight down, 200 feet maybe, and then putting honeycomb casement around it and packing it with topsoil, and then having a center shaft in the middle that was would have a robotic arm, and this would be an optical shaft, so it would channel light down this hole, and this robotic arm then would do all the seeding and the watering and all the work involved in it. So having this underground farm, if you will, has some interesting potential. As you look through the literature, there's a lot of work being done on vertical farming. These are, in the world of agriculture, these are way too expensive of buildings. They can't justify it. And everything in agriculture wears out over time. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in the vertical farming world. Over in Japan, they've done some experiments with the underground stuff. They've taken former bank vault, 10,000 square foot, and this is some of the stuff they're growing down underground in Japan. And again, this is way too elaborate. This is way too fancy. This is all showcase stuff. You can't cost justify any of this. You don't get a good ROI on these type of operations. So instead, you need something that's very low cost. But drilling a hole in the ground and and it can be above ground too. It could be a silo farm. But having a robotic arm that does most of the work and feeds you all the information about what's going on, that has some interesting potential. We did some rough calculations on it, and thinking we could actually put these in places where nothing grows today, northern Canada, central Australia, middle of the Sahara Desert. If you put these anywhere you want, you could actually create growing seasons that are 365 days a year rather than just one crop a year. It has a potential of increasing the world food supply 1,000-fold. So using this type of technology, we wouldn't be running out of stuff anytime soon. So what would an underground farm look like? Maybe something like this. These are things that are growing horizontally, but it could be vertical. So maybe this is what the underground farm of the future looks like. Putting them in the middle of cities. So I talk about agriculture to soon become the coolest profession on earth. So this is a real interesting robotic plant stand here that moves into the light. And they're kind of cool just having something that can just move and catch the rays when the timing is right. Okay, so that's...
Just by growing 25% of the food in their own area, that they would create $4 billion of new business, 27,000 new jobs, several $100 million in new taxes, and basically eliminated a lot of the dependencies that exist today in having to ship food in for the citizens. And we're doing a similar, or some of the people I'm involved with are doing the research to figure out the economics for us here in Boulder. We do $1 billion of food purchases, and less than 1% of it comes from Boulder County.
So very much a transportation avoidance kind of thing.
Bingo.
Got it. Okay.
Who was we?
Oh, it's a bunch of people, friends, associates, and like-minded people.
Not a county or university.
And so,
who was the Cleveland? What group?
The economist who did it his name is Michael Schumann. I could get you some more information on it.
Michael Schumann, I'm going to write that down here.
Yeah, he's doing the Boulder study as well. And it's,
sell as much Lucky's produce as possible. So it's going to come from 3 miles from the store, and they've already got the market to sell it. So
it's really a pairing between a store and a farm. Yeah. Good. Other ones? Yeah.
Well, I heard a presentation at the World Affairs Conference here just recently that relates to this. It was an entrepreneur with a nonprofit in Pittsburgh that was arranging to use a lot of the vacant land, and he was growing sunflowers, hiring the local people, and then selling the sunflower seeds as biofuel. So it could be applied to
flip chart down a series of things. So what we concentrated on was just really pure brainstorming, looking at other things that are going on that are worth sharing with others, because these are things that would be very useful to know. So I'll just go through them very, very briefly. One of them is the concept of local food sheds, kind of like watersheds, but in this case food sheds. So the idea is to avoid having to transport things, and therefore to try to pool the things, the crops that are grown, and share them in various different ways. The next thing that came up, and these are pretty well random, is CEAC, which is actually the Controlled Environment Agriculture Center. And remember I was talking about the South Pole? That's the group at the University of Arizona that's doing all the work. So if you want to know more about what's going on, that's the organization that you want to that you want to look at. And there's a website called ecoponics.com. So just make a note of that, because that is related to some of the things that they're doing there. There's also the concept of what's called micro-eco-centers. And those are basically regions which have their own ecology and their own people. I don't know that much about that particular one, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Related to local food sheds, there's also the concept of local food hubs. So if you have a microfarm, you probably can't grow enough for a particular supermarket or for a chain of supermarkets. But if you pool with other microfarmers, which is something that's going on in Charlottesville, Virginia, for example, you can actually create sufficient scale and become the supplier to a larger organization, either a supermarket chain or some of the kind of a food service supplier. So that's a very interesting concept. Then the Lucky's store in North Boulder actually works with Lucky's Farms. And for those of you who aren't aware of that, so basically that particular farm grows a lot of the food that's actually the produce that's sold in that store. So they have a kind of a one-to-one relationship between those two.
The employees also in that farm work in the store, work on the farm.
So, yes, and so the employees also work at that particular farm. So they basically combine the farm and the store in providing a full local solution, if you will. They're speaking of other local solutions in Pittsburgh. A lot of the vacant land has been turned into sunflower growing areas, primarily as a fuel source. We also talked in a slightly different direction, around coming back to Moore's Law, that there is a lot of evolution that's going on, or a lot of development, I should say, in terms of improving the photosynthetic process, either by further biological engineering of plants and other ways as well. Another site that's worth knowing about is one that's called harmony.com, which Prince Charles has set up. There's also the concept of heirloom seed bags. There is a person by the name of Wes Jackson, associated with the Land Institute in Kansas, who is very much into, and I can't remember exactly all the details. Perennial wheat is the key term to recognize there. And also we talked a little bit about the importance of fast freezing to basically capture everything that was in the particular produce before it evaporates. We talked about backyard chickens. The Rodale Institute, which is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which has done a lot of work looking at soil enrichment.
So Bert, take a while already.
Yep, we're almost there. The biodynamics movement. There's also a researcher by the name of Dr. Ingram at Oregon State in Portland, Oregon, who is an expert on soil chemistry, and the key term there is the soil food web. And another organization to be aware of is Transitions Colorado. So that's just a very quick nutshell of some of the major topics that we're doing. Okay, good.
For all nutrition, and so I'm active in the vegan community in Boulder and in Denver. Belong to two meetup groups that both drive potlucks on a periodic basis. And the one in Boulder now has 453 members. The last potluck we had, I bet you might know it. So. All right, so I guess we're going to get started here then. I smell something. Oh, must be chocolate. Corn nuts,
The contrail things, there's other thing. I mean,
Have you read up on the contrail?
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about
No, just
the
the
chemical part. I'm just talking about the pollution that spews into the atmosphere. It does dampen sun effectiveness.
it's a hydrocarbon cap.
There's some guys in Boulder that were measuring, they had some product they were trying to build, and one of the things they were doing was checking evaporation rates. And they had an experiment set up, and they had pretty much a baseline, and then 9/11 happened and all the jet stuff went.
Yeah, that day.
And for the next 3 days, everything changed in the experiments. It went, off the charts. And then the jets came back and it settled back to where it was before. So just that short period of cessation of jet travel was noticeable. It's pretty amazing.
3 degrees. It's pretty phenomenal.
Scary.
We live in such a global economy now. But one of the problems with the global economy is that we have no control locally.
Right.
Everything is influenced by decisions that are made in other countries, not even here, other countries. And
Well-
it has a lot to do with...
I'm going to stop you there. But go ahead. I mean, I'm going to comment after.
Oh, okay. So, our agricultural policy is a perfect example. I mean, our agricultural policy is really an extension of what our export policy is. And our export policy is that to try to bring as much wealth into the United States by exporting whatever it is that we produce, right? So the only thing we're producing anymore is just about is agricultural. The only product that we have anymore is agricultural.
So, of course, our group was talking about the economic and social impact of microagriculture. It seemed like environmental themes were the strongest discussion groups, and of course self-sufficiency at local levels. Apparently, Boulder County is doing running a lot of programs trying to increase the production and decrease imports and exports locally, and then trying to set an example for the world. There was talk about land trust to compete with big agriculture and the way it's going to gobble up a lot of the small farmland that's out there right now in small lots. There was also a lot of talk about externalized accountability. So when we account for the value of food and agriculture right now, we often don't account for environmental impacts and for the impact of subsidies on the cost at the point of sale. So it's kind of hard to judge what the actual cost total of our existing food system is. So there's a lot of talk about ways to change it. I don't have a lot of specifics right now because I didn't assemble this that fast. So. But I'm sure we'll come up with more research. Okay. All right, super.
Frank or Jeff?
I'm graduating in the next semester, so pretty excited about that. I'm majoring in advertising and humanities. It's a double major. So what I'm doing here is I'm the intern, the resident intern. So I'm kind of working on some of the brand strategies for the DaVinci Institute.
So how can we use this? How can we make it more productive? Use it. I'm interested in the algae biodiesel part. There's been an article reading about how farmers can grow their own fuel at this point as a trend, and as part of the aquaculture, found out that duckweed, which I thought was on all these scummy ponds, it actually has 22% protein in it. So that's kind of a fascinating piece. And then, being an animal science major is always, I came to realize that producing meat is a wasteful step in the chain, and you should really be eating lower down. It tastes delicious and I love meat, but from an energy standpoint, you should be eating at a lower level of the chain.
Interesting. That's great. Mark?
Yeah, my name is Mark Blinken. Grew up in Germany, if I ever grew up, whatever that's supposed to mean. Have been always growing things as long as I can think, but never just for the fun of it. The stress relief, I guess.
We had a small group in the back that talked about 10 years down the road, 2020. And instead of brainstorming tonight, for the most part, we tapped the concerns of the group to try to figure out how we could balance the byproducts, for example. Every time you do something, there's of course a counter reaction. And some of the discussions got into, of course, burning things like hydrogen. The problem becomes splitting water to make hydrogen so that you can get water back at the end after you get done burning it. And so that came to a discussion on balance and, of course, the difference between nature, which is where we came from, to where we're going down the road. We're talking about 9 billion people and feeding the world, essentially. And one of the big concerns here, two big concerns, became water distribution, handling water distribution, what we're going to do with all the CO2, and how we've got to end the process of mass transportation by huge volumes of food around the world. The amount of energy it takes is, of course, much greater than the end result benefit can be. So that broke us down to the micro level and a lot of interest. We talked in terms of grain, vegetables. Everybody knows how to raise vegetables and flowers here. How do we get to protein? And so a couple of the things we talked about, there's a project going on between the Netherlands and Princeton University on how to grow tissue
both skin tissue and muscle tissue. When you think of that, of course, that's being used to heal wounds and that sort of thing. But if we talk about an offshoot of that, we can talk about raising protein in the form of meat. That's entirely possible in the next 10 years. Insects is another possibility, but there aren't many of us here that want to put it on our plate right away. So we talked about, are there any clean ways to process insects that we can think of? The protein value there is phenomenal. Can we get some of that out of that? And so what I guess I'm going to do tonight is leave it up to the two people down here, Aquasource and AeroGrow, to start raising insects. What we did end up doing, though, I do want to say this, we did end up talking about how we want to carry it on. And are we going to do that in a minute? Yeah. Okay. Let me turn it over to Brian.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Ginger. I've been farmed for decades in Illinois and I'm seeking to move to Boulder permanently and be involved in agriculture. Here,
Paul Durda, got property in Wheat Ridge. It's 1 acre, got chickens, goats, ditch water rights.
They can't take it to give to their friends and neighbors, but anything they want to eat in exchange for helping me will attitude.
Good idea.
Yeah, that works out great. One of the things that I'd like to add as a topic I think is really essential to growing micro-agriculture is container gardening, because there are so many people who have smaller spaces and have failures sometimes because they don't understand what their true needs are, like the depth of the planter, but probably more than the width, or, you know, because of roots. But I think helping spread knowledge, there we go. See, I'm learning. Yes. I think, and the other topic that I think would really help grow gardening is integrating food with ornamental plants, flowers. Because people want their gardens, you know, we want them to be so pretty and perfect, but how do you interlace some colorful chard and, you know, spinach and other edibles and mining peas and stuff in with other,
Make it look good.
right, make it look nice. It just can't be bare all winter, you have to interlace, you know. But I think those are topics that would really spread the practice.
And I think that's garden design is what you're talking about, and that's a really big topic. A lot of this stuff is still in the do-it-yourself or the DIY stage. There seems to be a lot of, so who had the tilapias? Is that you? So I did look over the weekend for a good hour on a tilapia tank I could put in my living room, right? Which shouldn't be that difficult, a 10-gallon tank and eight plants on top or something. But there is no such animal available commercially, any big, whatever. You have to kind of get somebody.
The backyard. No, I'm good. Stay close to that. The backyard farming, I think we had the biggest group and they were a mean bunch. But we got through it. We talked about several different, my guess is kind of right. A lot of what the backyard farmer is doing is relearning technology that's been around for a long time. And so we shared a bunch of that information. And then we did also talk about new technologies that are on the horizon. I'll show you what I wrote down, or I'll share with you what I wrote down here. Some of the lead topics, and this is, again, for discussion at a future meetup or future date. Container farming is another form of backyard farming, backyard micro farming. And we talked about how China is doing that in great detail. And I think we heard from Tom about the Beijing planting. We talked about garden design, which was interesting, because if you're in a neighborhood and everyone's looking at your garden, what's it look like in the winter? Mine looks like a bunch of dirt plots, you know? And so that was something that we discussed. Companion planting was along with that same thing. We talked about the food aspect of this. Why would you grow a bunch of food if you don't cook? So some of using how to use all the stuff that you grow and how to get rid of it, and whether you hand it off to neighbors. And we got into a little bit about how we can share that with Local Share, which is a website that's currently available, Lucky's Market, which we didn't get to, but certainly that's another option. And we talked about storage over the winter, that kind of thing. We talked about vermiculture, which is the growing of worms. They are essential to your garden and also very essential to your composting. And then we talked about governance. We talked not only about governance on what our municipalities do and what the government as a whole does, but also about HOA agreements and contracts and where you live, and can I have a garden in my HOA? Can I put a flower box in my window? All that kind of stuff and how we get around that. And finally, we talked about water and the technologies surrounding micro farming with water are very important because we are in a shortage of water. And we discussed that for a little bit, which would be another great topic for the future meeting. I'll hand over to
Brian, you forgot the most important part.
What was it?
About where you get the worms.
Oh, McGuckins. McGuckins came up about 7 times, I brought it up 4 times. Let's all try to see McGuckins. Okay, people's kicking their butts, so we go.
The piece about, addressing the piece about protein and the...
Right, and so we spent a great deal of time on the aquaponics, and that's a great, it's a great idea of adding protein to your micro farm, and I learned from the kids to do it in my lesson. So there you go.
And so they had people talking typically these things that know way more about it than I do. But what I gathered from that is that there's primarily 4 main issues. One is water. You need water to grow anything. The second one is energy. Third one is environmental control. So temperature, area.
So far, that's the same as Earth.
Yeah, no, they're totally the same.
Only maybe magnified.
And that's why I think it's relevant here. And especially to what you were discussing again. And the fourth is what you were just talking about with waste processing. The waste products that are left over need to be recycled back into the next generation.
It's probably cheaper to make it, but yeah.
Does lack of gravity?
You could kind of wrap that into the environmental factors, but from what we know right now, which is really not that much, gravity probably doesn't matter that much. It probably depends on what you're growing.
Yeah.
But they've done some limited studies that suggest that, like in centrifuges.
Are we just talking like the Mars and the Moon, or are you talking farther out?
It could be asteroids, it could be, so like maybe a zero environment too.
All right, let's get right up. All right, in our group, we were talking about underground farming, and the question came up is whether this is underground like the illegal stuff or whether it's actually underground. We try to clarify that as being physically underground, but you can also grow illegal stuff underground too. Lee mentioned something that was pretty interesting. He just was at a retailers association meeting in Chicago, and Coca-Cola was exhibiting a vending machine there that had 100 different choices that you can mix together, and so you can blend your vanilla, cherry, Coke in any formula you wanted to, and so all of that is going down that path already. So we talked about lots of different variations of underground farming, and whether it was in some of the underground coal mines in Poland, or whether it's in our own basements, in our spare bedrooms, or whether it's in our backyards. And this idea of farming and turning farming into a complete closed ecosystem was kind of the theme that we kind of hit upon. The idea of water shortages is, a lot of people aren't aware of some of the research that's being done on creating special hybrids of plants that can grow in salt water. So saltwater rice and saltwater wheat and corn and things like that are being explored right now. So we have a lot more saltwater than we do freshwater. So some interesting options there. And we were discussing some of the options of where underground farming would work. And as an example, a lot of the golf courses right now are in trouble because people don't have enough time or money to play golf, and so and young kids growing up would much rather play Wii golf than regular golf. And so turning golf courses into something else is a real challenge, because a lot of wealthy people live around golf courses, and cities don't want to take on a lot more parkland. And so what does that land lend itself to? Potentially some sort of urban gardens or underground farming or something like that might make sense. And so what other things do we
Shopping centers.
Yeah, there's a lot of shopping centers that are dying, so those might be logical places to convert into some sort of micro-farming operation. Anything else that we should bring up? All right, with that, let's kind of wrap it up here because we want to decide where to go from here. If you remember the pictures I showed you of the seasteading operation, seasteading was kind of a vague concept until they started actually creating something that looked like something that you could identify with, a place where you might want to live yourself. So if we can think through what microfarming might look like and actually start building some images, telling stories about it, doing storyboards, videos on this topic, suddenly it all starts changing. So I want to open up the floor here.
What I was going to suggest is, I would like to go through this list, starting with 1, find out how many of you would like to see that topic evolve further, get into greater depth, and if some of you are interested in contributing between now and the 22nd of June to the next session. Okay? So let's start with backyard farming. Can I see by a show of hands how many of you would like to carry that on and get into a greater level of discussion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, we've got 19 interested in backyard farming. Let's go to the next one, social and economic impact on farming. Can I see by a show of hands how many are interested in that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we got one more, 7. Is that all right? Somebody count with me so they can make sure I'm on target, all right? 7. Next, we've got ag visions. That's pushing down the road 10 years to the future. Our group pretty much determined that almost everything's possible. How many of you would be interested in everything's possible? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Got 15 in that group. Okay. Next is microagronomy around the world. This breakdown of all the information here, there's a lot of topics in there. We almost should break those topics down. How brave are you, Bert?
We'll evolve into something else, which is...
How many groups do you want to run?
No, I think what we want to do is evolve that into finding other things that are going on in the world and sharing them.
Oh, excellent. Did everybody hear him? Essentially, what Bert is saying, if I can paraphrase it, he's looking for the list, kind of a dictionary or a table of contents, a menu of all the various activities that are going on worldwide, and creating a resource. Is that correct? Okay. Can I see a show of hands that would be interested in participating or doing something with that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26.
And the winner is...
All right, and number 5, we've got underground farming. That's building illegal crops. How many of you are interested in that? You can store your money down there too. Okay, got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Going once, going twice. Okay, we have 8 there. Now some of these might be combined with others. Actually, that one might actually be combined with the other one here. We have 3 relatively strong categories. Number 1, which is backyard farming. Number 3, which is ag visions. And number 4, which is microagronomy around the world.
You can include the 5 into the 3.
Okay, well, if that,
Carry the two.
how's that? The year 2020 underground?
And I suggest that you combine number 2 with number 4, because they're kind of one and the same.
Yeah. Okay, now, Tom, how would they go about letting us know their interest in these various areas? Can we create something on the internet?
Yeah, we could send out, what we can do is we can put together a survey that we'll send out to everybody. Give us a couple days to put that together. And we'll kind of gather a little more input from everybody at that time. In the meantime, the people who've been working on this, we'll need to get our heads together and kind of formulate next step processes.
So the project as a whole is communicating with the future. And in terms of communicating with the future, we came up with this particular topic after filtering down a whole bunch of topics, all right? And what we decided to do was hold a meetup, which is tonight, to find out what the community interest is in being able to move forward. As Tom talked about, the future isn't a matter of just happening. It's something we believe we control. It's something we believe we can play a very strong hand in. And we want to know who else wants to work with us on that, particularly or specifically relative to microagriculture. The word micro may be less important than the word of localized agriculture, or agriculture we handle on a totally different scale. Doesn't mean we're shooting down the corporate farms. They're going to exist, they're going to continue to exist. There's certain advantages there. But we're seeing a movement, grassroots movements, if you will, that's already taken form and been successful in some corporations at a much smaller level, at the home level, if you will. Okay? So our goal is to find out what the community here is interested in. We know what we're interested in. You saw our topics this evening up here. And the next question becomes the final execution of that. We don't know what the final execution is. We believe it's evolutionary. We will know more, we believe, on the 22nd. So we're going to organize the information from tonight. Some of you may want to help us do that. Tom's going to put together the questionnaire, or at least it's going to go out of here from a group of us. And we will carry it on from that point to see how it grows. Even though we're saying we're in control of this thing, we know that it's a live, organic thing. Imagine that. Stop. We're trying to find out what that live, organic thing is. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. I would submit that one of the principles that is embraced going forward is, which perhaps is something we've all heard ad nauseum, is that the notion of sustainability, in that it means leaving things better than we found them.
I think in every single group presentation this evening, we heard a very strong sense of ethics and how we approach this. In fact, my topic earlier started out to be almost out of the box. And the first thing I heard out of our group was, whoa, wait a minute, are we doing this right? And I think that we're going to hear that over and over again. I think the challenge that our team has recognized, though, is that even though we want the ethics, we don't want to put the brakes on. As our team put it, there is no balance, there is no real true nature. Not anymore, because we're in control. And if we're not in control, somebody else is. That's the assumption going forward. Now, we have to stay very ethical, but we don't want it to squelch the entire project. It's not the only interest.
Any other thoughts or comments as we wrap this up here tonight? All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate all of the effort that's gone